Hi, so today we're talking about motion within ITF Taekwondo patterns. So especially in the ITF Union, if you compete on patterns, 1/3 of the weight of the marks for the patterns from the judges is going to go on rhythm. So motion is important on the rhythm. So if you think of the rhythm of a pattern, not necessarily the speed that you perform the pattern. I mean, you could perform, speaking musically, you could perform the pattern at 100 RPM or 120 RPM, as long as everything stays constant to the speed that you're performing. That's what we're talking about when we talk about rhythm. So motion would be including several different points. I'm going to talk about the most important ones and how you should perform them. There are other motions. Two of the motions that I'm not going to go into today are circular motion and sliding motion, because those two are quite self-explanatory. Circular motion means to perform a technique in a circular motion, and sliding motion means that you slide. Now the distance you slide can vary depending on the pattern. Okay, like jumps, we do have a sheet printed out in our dojang if you're training here that you can look at on the window ledge that tells you how far you should slide or jump in which pattern that you're performing. Okay, so I'm going to include a little chart. Hopefully it's going to be about here, which explains the motions that I'm going to go into today. So you can, hopefully if I put this as a printout, as a PDF in the comments below as well, you'll be able to print it out, practice while you're at home. So first motion is just normal motion. When you're performing a normal motion, you have one breath as you breathe out, as you perform that motion, and it is one move. Okay, so if you think about your normal motion, everything else is relative speed to that normal motion, however fast or slow you perform that normal motion. So the second type of motion is continuous motion. So in continuous motion, like you would see in pattern dangun, that's the earliest one where we do a low block and then a rising block, it still only has one breath, although there are two moves. Okay, but there are also two complete sine waves. So the thing to do on the continuous motion is not go too fast. It's not fast motion, these are just continuation. So as you're performing the first technique, which may be the low block, you then still need a full sine wave on the second technique. So it's nearly as though you're performing both techniques at normal speed. Okay, but because we don't want the first technique to pause for quite as long at the end, it's just slightly faster, but it is certainly not. This would be fast motion. It's not fast motion, it is just a continuation, okay, but one outward breath, so that breath prolongs throughout the two techniques. The next type of motion is fast motion. So we see fast motion on pattern dosan at the earliest. After we've done the middle section front kick, we then perform 1, 2, a fast motion double punch. Okay, now on a double punch, on any other fast motion, it has two breaths, so both punches are it's two techniques, there are two punches, but you only have, for the second punch, the second part of the techniques, you only have 2/3 of the sine wave motion, because after that first punch, you are then only going to do the up and down bit. You're not going to do down, up, down like you would do if it's a full sine wave movement. So you only have 2/3 of the sine wave in a fast motion technique. Okay, so in a continuous, 2 full sine waves. Fast motion, 2/3 on the second technique. And you see how much faster the double punch is than on a continuous movement. The next type of motion is a slow motion technique, which should roughly spread out for about 4 seconds from start to finish. And if you can imagine yourself performing the slow technique at full speed, then playing it back in slow motion, that's how the movement in a slow motion technique should be performed. Okay, so try not to get at situations where your feet are finished and then your hands are still moving, because in pattern chungun, where we do the pressing blocks in slow motion, if I did it fast, everything would finish together. So I still have to try and get that movement stretched out, but over a period of 4 seconds. Okay, and one thing we do notice on slow motion techniques is people stuttering their leg forward like this because they're putting their foot in contact with the mat too soon. Try and bend this back leg and keep that front leg off the floor as long as possible, okay, to help the movement of that technique going forwards. Okay, if you were doing it in fast motion, the foot wouldn't actually touch the floor until the last second. Obviously that's a bit more difficult in slow motion because of your balance point, but as much as you can, hold that foot off the mat, and then for the last little bit where it can't, put the ball of the foot on the mat and slowly push it in to its final position. Okay, so that is slow motion, which is a full technique, has one breath and is performed as fast motion, but in a slow motion version. Okay, and the last different motion we're going to talk about today is connecting motion that we see in pattern Yulgok, where we perform a hooking block, then a second hooking block and a punch. The second two techniques in that little combination are connective movements. Okay, so therefore it has only one breath, two moves, but it only has 1/3 of the sine wave motion. So after this first hooking block, I'm already up when I perform the second one. So the only part of sine wave that it has is the dropping back down to perform the punch. Okay, so the 5 different types of motion we've been through: normal motion, full sine wave, one breath, one move; continuous motion, full sine wave on both, only one breath, but it is 2 moves; fast motion, 2/3 sine wave, 2 breaths, and there are 2 moves; slow motion is as normal motion but slower, full sine wave, one breath, one move; and connective motion only has 1/3 sine wave, one breath, but it's 2 techniques. Okay, so that is motion, and that is how you need to perform the techniques in order to keep your pattern in the correct rhythm to score well at competition.